Genesis 2:8 says, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed."
From the standpoint of the Holy Land, or Palestine, southern Mesopotamia lies to the east. Also, the Sumerian-Akkadian word Eden means plain, prairie, or desert, and a dry climate requires irrigation to provide water for drinking, bathing, and to water livestock and crops.
Genesis 2:9 says, "And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight, and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil."
The tree of life has some history outside of Genesis. A sacred tree is often depicted in Sumerian wall reliefs and cylinder seals, often in the company of kings and priests. In this one Assyrian depiction, two Assyrian angel-like beings carry buckets of pollen for fertilizing the sacred trees. In Iraq to this day, date palms are still fertilized in this same manner.
Genesis 2:10 says, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads."
The head of a river is the source. Thus, four rivers come together at one place. Substituting English words for Hebrew words without knowing the facts misses the mark with this verse. There are two thoughts. The garden is watered by a river or canal that comes from the Eden or desert. And there are four rivers that empty into one place.
Genesis 2:11 through 14. The name of the first is Pishon. That is it which compasses the whole of the land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasses the whole land of Ethiopia, Cush. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel. That is it which goes toward the east of Assyria, and the fourth river is Euphrates.
Here's where maps come in handy. This is southern Mesopotamia, land between the rivers, present-day Iraq. You can see the Persian Gulf as it was during the time from Adam to Abraham, roughly 7,000 years ago to 4,000 years ago. The coastline is about 30 miles further south today, as silt from the rivers has gradually filled in the upper region. The easiest river to identify is the Euphrates. Later in Genesis 15:18, the Lord makes a covenant with Abraham and names the Euphrates as the eastern boundary of his land. The Hiddekel, or Tigris, is the great river Daniel stood beside, Daniel 10:4. It originates in the region of Assyria, flowing southeast until it emptied into the Persian Gulf, east of Assyria, just as stated in Genesis. Dominic McCausland identified the Gihon as the Giades of the ancients, the modern Karkay, joined by the Kashkan River in the region where the Cushites, also known as Kassites, originally settled. Today, this is called Khuzestan, a province in the southwest corner of Iran. Samuel Driver placed Havilah in the northeast of Arabia. The gold of Arabia was famous in antiquity. A dictionary of the Bible identified Havilah as the sandy region of northern Arabia, which extended westward towards the frontier of Egypt. Archaeologist Juris Zarins identified an ancient riverbed in this region from Landsat satellite photos. The Pishon can be identified from the reference to the land of Havilah listed in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. Images from the Landsat satellite shows a fossil river that once flowed through northern Arabia and through the now dry beds. And as Genesis says, this region was rich in bdellium, an aromatic gum resin that can still be found in North Arabia, and numerous companies mine gold in Saudi Arabia today. A Boston University scientist studied pebble distributions in Kuwait and reached the same conclusion as Zarins. A river once flowed into this country from the mountains in Saudi Arabia, He dubbed it the Kuwait River. Sumer, or Shinar in Hebrew, seen elsewhere in Genesis and the rest of the Old Testament, was the location where the Sumerians established themselves, dating to at least 4000 BC. They were the first to invent cuneiform handwriting on clay tablets and developed a culture that had laws based upon the edicts of the king. They had priests, marriage, and divorce, division of labor into specified tasks and occupations. In short, this was the first culture to have a somewhat sophisticated organization. The Akkadians, located a little northwest of the Sumerians, are the people we are primarily interested in. They spoke a Semitic tongue, a language precursor to other Semitic languages such as Hebrew, Canaanite, and Ugarit, for example. History books in general give short shrift to the Akkadians, concentrating instead on the more culturally advanced Sumerians. However, the biblical story begins with these people, the Adamites and Semites, who were part of the Akkadian culture. Also, the Sumerians and Akkadians were not isolated populations. In the roughly 2,000 years of history in this region, there was plenty of interaction. They learned each other's language. The Akkadians learned to write, taught by the Sumerians. The first war in recorded history was between them. The three gods worshipped by the Akkadians, Elu, Ea, and Enlil, were adopted by the Sumerians and given primacy. In turn, the pantheon of Sumerian gods worked their way into the Akkadian culture, which was a continual problem lasting for many centuries among the Semites and Hebrews, and may have led to the Great Flood that was judgment upon the Adamic population.
Some believe the flood was worldwide and completely scrubbed the original landscape, such that those rivers in Genesis were named after the original rivers.
The difficulty with that idea is that three lands were also included: Assyria, named for Ashur, and Cush, who were Noah's grandsons, and Havilah was his great-grandson. They didn't exist in the pre-flood era, so the lands and rivers had to be named after the fact, which serves to preclude a global flood. This is the region. These are the rivers.
So essentially, Genesis is an integral part of the history of the ancient Near East and has gone unnoticed by biblical scholars.
Exactly. In the next episode, we'll begin to examine the Sumerian king list and see how important it is in understanding biblical history. I want to thank Ken for joining me, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions over this material, please email me and we will try to incorporate the answers in future broadcasts. And please visit our website, genesisproclaimed.org.